Hi there, and welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, a show where a father and son sit down and talk about things from fantasy literature. I'm the son in that equation, Zach.
And that makes me the father, Jim. Great to have you with us for a midweek special today.
Absolutely.
We're going to be talking about another magic system, but before we dive into that,
Okay.
just some regular business that we take care of as usual. First off, I thought I might ask, how are you doing today, Zach?
Well, I'm alright. It's been a day, but it's been good weather. So there's at least that. And it's done now.
Good weather, you say?
Yeah.
I went for my walk this morning and it was 30 degrees.
Okay, so maybe it started cold, but by the time we got to the afternoon, it was warm enough that I just had a sweater, not even a coat.
But it's April. It's spring. We shouldn't need coats anymore.
April's when it's supposed to rain on us, so I guess
April
we
showers.
should.
No, we're in the Northwest. It can rain on us any freaking time it wants.
True.
I had a fun day today. You know, we are still in the midst of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We've been here for 12 months now, over 12 months. I've worked from home for the majority of that time.
Mm-hmm.
But being I am fully vaccinated now,
Yes.
as are you, as is your mother.
Whole household here.
That's right. I actually went clear across town for a business meeting today. I was meeting with someone else who was also fully vaccinated. So we got to our meeting spot, we took our masks off, and we just talked. Still didn't touch on each other. We're not going to go crazy or anything. No handshakes, none of that. But it was really pleasant to just look at someone and have a conversation. And the CDC does allow that.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to sit here trying to remember and go, if you're both vaccinated, what is the current guideline on mask or no mask and all that?
Oh, it actually says if you are together in a private place, you can take your masks off.
Huh. Interesting.
Now, technically not in a place of work, but we weren't at either places of work. We were in a neutral site.
Met at like a Starbucks or something?
No, because, that could have worked. No,
Then you could have also had coffee.
Anyways, it was really nice. I had an excuse to drive clear across town and do something, and that was great. I don't get to go anywhere these days, so hey.
Nice to be back to it a little bit.
Absolutely. And what are you drinking tonight, Zach?
For me, it's just White Russian, standard-ish for my taste.
You didn't mix it up or do it weird this time?
Not really.
All right.
It just felt like it was the right thing for tonight.
Let's assume there's someone out there who doesn't know what a White Russian is.
Well, assuming I'm not doing it horribly wrong, which I'm sure someone can correct me, and I am.
We get an email. He's freaking lost his mind.
It's 2 parts vodka, 1 part Kahlua, and then milk.
Okay. And it's yummy.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I enjoy it. I'm partial more to the creamy than the citrus, but that's just my preference.
Very good. I went the lazier route today. My drink is just wine. I'm drinking a nice Chenin Blanc from the Maryhill Winery. That's a place we have a membership at. This is one of their premium wines. It's a white wine. It's very pleasant, a little citrusy, not oversweet. And the secret ingredient is frozen green grapes.
It's not really secret. You can see right through the wine and see it.
Yes, if you've not done that, if you didn't know that, white wine served with frozen green grapes is awesome because it doesn't dilute your wine. They do unfreeze as they're sitting in there, but then when the wine is gone, you have these delicious grapes that have soaked up the wine. If you haven't done it and you like white wine, do it.
Boozy
Just
fruit
do it.
is the way to go.
Mm-hmm. Before we move then on into the content for our midweek special today,
Okay.
we have a retraction.
We
to put
do.
in, and it is awesome.
Because I did a dumb.
Well, we've been picking up new listeners. And so this is one of our new listeners who actually just today listened to our first episode and let us know we had made a gaffe. Now, way back to this is episode 23, so way back to our first episode, we were just introducing the podcast.
Yeah, just chatting.
We were talking about the kinds of fiction we enjoy. And while we're primarily fantasy-based, we've mentioned we put a broad definition on fantasy, so it may cover science fiction.
Occasionally.
Yep. It may cover horror. The things that are more fantastical still falls into stuff we can enjoy and
there
dabble
could be
in.
quite a bit of crossover there.
And I had asked Zach in that first episode if he'd read any of Asimov, like the Foundation series, which I have read and I've enjoyed. And his response was...
Is that the guy who did do androids dream of electric sheep? Wow, English is hard.
Do androids drink of electric
Androids
sheep?
do drink.
Lay off
I'm
the white
standing on
Russian,
it.
my friend.
Androids drink.
So he's talking about androids and electric sheep. My mind went to androids, robots, iRobot, Asimov. Sure, yeah, that's it.
That's incorrect.
No, it's not.
By a lot.
We have done a great disservice to all of you true sci-fi fans. We have outed ourselves as not truly having sci-fi cred. We just dabble a little.
I like to out myself as I like to read, but I'm young enough that I haven't read enough.
We have some fantasy cred. We've read a lot of fantasy. We've only dipped our toes into sci-fi. And Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a classic tale by Philip K. Dick, who has written a whole bunch of really top-notch science fiction. So we do owe an apology to all of you who are true sci-fi fans, who venerate Philip K. Dick. I don't think he cares, because I don't think he's alive anymore.
I don't know. I'll still throw the apology to him and Isaac Asimov, because
Now, if he is alive, I just ticked off the fans again.
Point is, we don't know that much about Philip K. Dick ourselves.
I have not read it. I know of him. I know of his works because it is classic, and a fan of literature should know that, but I have not read the tale.
I like to give myself the tiniest bit of credit that I didn't claim it was him. I just asked.
You threw it out there, and I said, "Oh yeah, sure, yeah, no." So we both have some fault here. So King of the Nord is the person out there in Discord world who called us on that. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If we didn't deter him strongly enough, because this was the first episode, he might hear this eventually, and
Maybe.
we're giving him credit. By the way, he lives in Alaska,
Hey,
where
we've
we
been
spent
there.
many years, so, there's some kinship there. Very nice. With that out of the way, we get to move into what we're doing here today.
Yes, magic system.
This is our second of our series of evaluating the magic systems in various fantasy tales.
Today, like we said in our previous episode, we are covering the world of Shannara and everything that happens in it. I'm pretty sure the world actually has a different name, considering it is our world, kind of.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because really our study will start even prehistory from where we are now, because the magic that's involved goes all that way back. Terry Brooks wrote something like 40 novels in this series. They are done now.
I'm still sitting here going, I'm pretty sure it's 32, 33, something like that, because I made a list, because I haven't read that many of them yet. But we're content to disagree with each other on that until we find out.
Basically, we could agree there were a lot.
Yeah.
He wrote a lot. In some circles, Terry Brooks gets a little dissed about this series. And, some of it, people have a point. Now, let me say the two ways that people have a point.
Okay.
One is that the very first book of the series, The Sword of Shannara,
Yes.
was the first book he ever wrote to be published.
Okay.
He was a brand new author. If my memory is correct, he was a lawyer who decided, I kind of like writing. Let me try this.
And often in those first books, there are prone to some early kinks to work out.
In interviews, Terry Brooks admits that, I was still figuring out how to do this writing thing. And even if you read that first book, The Sword of Shannara, he wrote it over quite a span of time. Mm-hmm. So the first half of the book is not as well written and as tight as the second half of the book. I mean, if you really look at it analytically, you can see the progression of his skill as an author. You get to book 2, The Elfstones of Shannara, and it's clearly better written. He had the first book under his belt. He'd kind of learned as he went. And when you get to the third one, The Wish Song of Shannara, it's the far superior of the first trilogy.
Okay.
And then he'd hit his stride. So this is going good, but I said there were 2 criticisms
Yeah, what's the
that
other
had
one?
validity. The second criticism, and I don't agree with this criticism because I'm a Terry Brooks fanboy. I just enjoyed all of this. But there were people like me who just wanted more. So he kept coming up with more things to write in this world, and he starts to get a little redundant.
And so it feels a little bit played out, more like, why don't you come up with a fresh new idea kind of thing?
He is accused of that. Again, I found enough in all of these books to not be dissatisfied.
I believe you just finished the final one that was
a couple of months ago.
semi-recently
Absolutely.
released.
And found it satisfying. I did not find the last, it was a 4-book series to end it. I did not find it brilliant and wow, but I found it satisfying.
It was good to end with.
Yes. And I will say that even in this last set, he introduced some new things, including in how magic worked.
Great.
So, as we talk about the magic of Shannara, we have to kind of do a little history that goes through the books and then dissect each of the magic pieces. This is so different than our first one.
Yeah.
From Wheel of Time.
Absolutely. I know some of these pieces
system.
Here, but I don't
you
know
just
the
said that
history
so well,
very
though.
much.
You know some of these pieces here. There are a ton of little pieces.
Yeah.
And I read an interview recently by either the editor or one of Terry Brooks' editors. He may have had more than one editor over the course of these books.
Fair enough. It's been a long time.
And the editor was saying, really, the magic system, he's talking about it, the magic system Terry Brooks came up with is very solid. It's just he didn't reveal it all at once. He just kept rolling out layers of it. But if you really go back and look at it all, it doesn't contradict itself. It doesn't go against itself. He just keeps revealing new nuances. And I think that is actually kind of true. Now, the best part of this is that I'm going to go all the way back. Ancient history in the world of Shannara.
Okay.
And where magic comes from in this world.
And where is that?
The world of fairy.
Sweet. We get fairies, right?
We do. Now, we never have these little Tinkerbells with wings.
No?
I think there probably were, but that's not what we mean by fairy. We're talking about F-A-E-R-I-E. Very old style spelling of fairy.
Basically, fae folk and various creatures like it.
Yes. And back in the time of fairy, before anything was seen about mankind, they were basically these fairy folk who came in good kinds and bad kinds. And the good kinds were...
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
Yes! The good kinds were things like the elves, the traditional fairies, the gnomes, even though they come back with gnomes meaning something else later. All the different kinds of fantastical and magical creatures. Mm-hmm. And then the demons. Now, the demons wasn't one thing called a demon. There were a whole bunch of demon type of fairy type creatures. So all of these creatures are innately magical.
And they have some innate level of good or bad?
Not the magic itself being good or bad, but what they do with the magic. So you've got the ones that ride with the dark side, and those that are more Jedi-like. Yes.
So we've got innate fairy magic.
Yes. And it's just an essence of the world. And the magic itself is later come to be understood as something that just exists tied to all of life. And it can be either good or it can be bad. And again, it goes to your makeup, how you want to use it. Now, mankind comes along eventually. Mm-hmm. And the fairy folk kind of withdraw a little bit. Because these aren't magical. People weren't innately magical. But they end up becoming engaged and involved with magic. And through something that Terry Brooks calls the word and the void. And this is where people really try to help guide magic and how it's used and what it does for the world.
That feels like a very complex and yet very vague statement at the same time.
It's a fundamental thing, though, to understand about magic in the world of Shannara. Because the word perspective of magic is that we want to use it for good things. We want to use it to guide the world, shape the world, help the world.
But the void?
The void wants to cause chaos, wants to destroy, wants to just be all bad. So where the word perspective will lift up, the void will tear down. It's all still the same magic.
But it's
how
two halves
it's trying
of
to use
this
it.
magic kind of in its usage.
Yes. And it's just it's a natural struggle that has been there from the time of fairy, and mankind comes and plays a role as well. Now, Terry Brooks wrote a series, and I read this as it came out, where he'd done some Shannara books already.
Yeah.
And then he comes out with this urban fantasy series, which comes to be called the Word and the Void series.
And initially, it wasn't thought necessarily to be connected,
well,
right?
It may have been. But when you read it initially, no, you see no connection to Shannara. But it ends basically with the world being destroyed in nuclear holocaust. And then he ties that into... Remember, in the Shannara world, it's set way in the distant future where the world was destroyed in the Great War.
A nuclear holocaust.
So the Word and the Void is basically a prequel
The origin story for the world.
And eventually he adds a trilogy into the Shannara cycle called the Genesis of Shannara, which bridges that gap.
It really
Picks up-
explains,
yeah.
hey, these two are connected.
Right. Now, the fairy folk and the demons, they're all still here throughout the entire series of Shannara. But back before the humans came around,
Yes.
most of the demons were magically removed from the world
Sweet.
to a place called the Forbidding.
So they basically got sent to hell.
Yes, very much so. And it's a place they cannot escape. And all their dark magic is there too. And the ones who did that to them were the elves.
Not all the fairy, the good ones,
It
but
was
rather
really
just
the elves who were
specifically
really
the elves.
the highest, the paragons of good in the world of fairy.
At least at that time.
Now, when humans came along, all the fairy folk faded into the distance. The elves were there all along. And of course, in mankind's legends, elves were a thing. People knew there were fairy folk. They just didn't believe they were really real.
But humans are scary, so fairies hide.
Then you have the Great War. Everything disintegrates. The elves magically protect themselves from it.
It comes in handy when you can use magic.
Yes,
Which, as we know, in some way, that is a use for their magic.
it is. And eventually, when life kind of starts to come back and the world begins to come back alive after, I don't know, the half-life of radiation has passed,
Probably a couple half-lives.
we end
lot.
up with a bunch of different races that exist now. In the world Terry Brooks spends most of his time in, there are humans. They live in the Southland, mostly. A few of them live up in other scattered places in the Northland, but the main majority are in the Southland. The Federation. Big nation, most of the land. Interestingly, by the way, most of this that takes place is set in the Pacific Northwest. So
Woo!
where we live.
It's a local story.
The Columbia River is actually one of the
prominently.
features in the maps. So that's just kind of a tickle thing since we live there.
It does actually work out to be, especially if you take away the human element, a pretty picturesque fantasy landscape with the whole gorge aspect.
Sure. So you got the humans mostly down south. And then you have up north these other races. You have the dwarves. You have the ogre. You have the gnomes. And you have the elves. Now, what's funny is that I said ogre. Not ogre.
That's not
the
ogres.
Trolls.
It's trolls, is it not?
Sorry, they're trolls. But the trolls,
I knew that one,
the
at
gnomes,
least.
and the dwarves are all still humans. They're just humans who are mutated
In some
through
way, shape,
this
or
time.
form. These are not fairies. These are humans
They
with
are
mutation.
humans that have simply mutated. And the dwarves still pretty much look like humans, but they're stunted. They hid underground for years and years. And they basically become stockier and shorter, but they are still pretty much look human, just with that dwarven look to
What
them.
were the three you said? Dwarves, trolls, and...
Gnomes.
But these are different than the other gnomes.
Yeah,
you said
not
are
the gnomes of
fairy
fairy.
gnomes.
These are humans.
So there's multiple kinds of gnomes.
Just because we know gnomes are a type of fairy folk, they're not mentioned at all, really, in this Shannara series.
So two totally different things were called gnomes.
Most of the type of fairy folk are not referenced at all in
It's just
the
they
action.
Did exist.
Yes. And we get a few examples of other fairy folk over the course of the books, but they're not very prevalent. What's really significant is that the elves become another of the people of this time, instead of where all before they were a fairy folk that hid and magically nobody could see them or know what they were doing, really.
But the
Now
elves
they are
step
a
forward
race.
into the light.
They are a nation, just like all these other groups. But all the other ones, again, are just descendants and mutations of mankind. The elves are not. They're something special, and they are something magical.
And the demons are still locked in the forbidding.
Yes. Throughout the series, there will be multiple times where the demons get out of the forbidding. Either all of them or one of them, but the forbidding plays a role again and again and again.
And really, anytime any of them escape, it's a problem.
Oh, it's bad. This brings us to, okay, let's talk about some of the magic things that happen.
Let's do it.
One of the first key magic factors that Terry Brooks introduces are the druids. Now, the druids are not another race,
No,
not another
it's
nation.
Something different.
They are a group, a club.
A cult?
In a way, they are a gathering of people committed to magic. After the end of the Great Wars, which were caused by science. When the world kind of came back, science was rejected. We're not going back to that science stuff. And instead, the great minds that rose from the various races got together and discovered magic. Now, discovered? Not really. Rediscovered.
Yeah,
Christopher
Columbus did.
And some of those druids at first, including the first head druid who pulled everyone together, was an elf. So the elves already knew magic. Now, the elves that we know in this day and age are not like the elves of the time of fairy. Having come out into the real world, in a sense, they've left some of their magicalness behind.
They don't have as much, or at least not as powerful, innate magic ability.
Correct. They've
They are
become
still
more like people.
Innately magical, but they are not innately capable of magic.
Right. There are some elves that use no magic at all. Their world, their nation is still imbued with magic, but not all of them are magical by nature. But they are more in touch with magic than just people.
They're magic sensitive.
I like that. The druids, they come together and they are going to study magic. They're going to develop capability with magic, and their purpose is to do this to better all of people. I don't know
Not
how
all
to say
of
this. You
humanity,
can't say all
'cause
of
they're not
mankind.
just-
They're not all men.
Yeah.
But for all the races. Okay. And they establish their site, their place to study in a castle, a keep called Paranor. They established this as its own unique place. It's not part of any of the nations. It's its own separate spot, kind of right in the center of everything.
Gee, I've never heard of a magic place being established completely separate from any nation. It happens in a lot of fantasy books.
But their intent was to therefore not be owned by any of the nations, nor to be able to be accused of favoring any of the nations. And they have elves, men, gnomes, dwarves. I don't know if they have any trolls, but they have trolls who are bodyguards, soldiers that protect the druids. That's a thing at various times. So the trolls are involved. I don't remember ever coming across a troll druid.
It may just existed. It's never important, but
Yeah,
it's not
and maybe
also
a reader will
common.
say, a listener will say, no, remember that one in that one book? And I've just forgotten it right now. Because it totally could be. The druids, they have three missions. One, learn the magic and use it for the betterment of all the races.
Can we just say of all? It's less wordy.
Sure, of all.
There we go.
Two, be a resource and knowledge to help guide all of the races. They're about world peace. They're trying to help everybody have life be as good as possible.
And three,
and this kind of develops just a little later. When the books first start, this isn't necessarily emphasized as one of their plans or priorities. It might already be, but it's not said, is to seek out objects and things that are magical and bring them into the druid's control so that it's not out there causing harm and doing damage elsewhere.
Okay, so
they want to control all the magic.
To summarize, they want to know about magic shit, know about all the other
that
shit,
word.
and also get all of the magic shit.
That's not inaccurate. So, at various times throughout the series, the druids are respected and feared, questioned, because they're powerful, and they don't want to let anybody else have their magic.
And they don't like to be controlled.
Now, let's talk about the magic that the druids have.
Yes.
It's primarily elemental. So, they learn to do things to manipulate and work with earth, air, fire, and water. There's a little bit that has to do with the spiritual / supernatural as well.
Okay, like soul stuff?
A few of the things we see in particular with the druids that are emphasized at times are when a high druid, the head druid, dies, they don't just die. Their spirit joins the spirit of other high druids and can come back and talk to other druids who come to a certain specific place called the Valley of Shale.
So what I'm getting a sense for is it's basically the Force.
They become Force ghosts. That's pretty good. It's a very spooky thing, and you can only come to that place. It's a lake in the middle of the Valley of Shale called the Hades Horn that is basically deadly water.
That doesn't sound good.
And you can only come down to it on foot at night and just before dawn. If they're willing, the spirits will come to you.
That's sketchy.
Yeah, it's always very tense and scary when it happens. And the spirit that rises and talks to you knows the future. sort of. So it will reveal things, but it won't reveal everything, and it has its own agendas, and it plays a role multiple times in the series. But this is magic. This is an element of magic.
Of course. Now, I have a quick important question because it's one of the few clarifications that I am kind of solid on needing to ask here about magic in this series. Mm-hmm. You said they have elemental magic and stuff. Can that elemental magic affect anything?
If it can be affected elementally.
Okay.
Yes. There's no one that
there
has
are some,
druid shield magic.
Well,
no.
There are some magic things in this world that can't affect plenty of things. And we'll get to those.
Yeah. This is what they do is really very common elemental magic, and a lot of times they just make things blow up.
Sweet.
The other thing that is highlighted multiple times is a special thing druids can do with their magical abilities called druid sleep.
And basically they cryostasis.
In a way. It tends to be only the high druid, which is the head of the druid order. When the books first open, there is only one druid left.
The high druid Alanon, is that correct?
Yes.
Nailed it.
He's the head of the druids because there aren't any druids. He's the only one left, and you learn that there had been a catastrophe some years back, and he's the sole survivor. And he exists in all three of the first books, even though they happen over a long period of time.
Like hundreds of years,
A few hundred years by the use, not hundreds.
When you're including
I think it's like
the entirety of the
150
first
years
three, I
maybe
want
in
to say
the
it's like
first three.
6 generations.
I didn't do the research on that. But it's more than a man could normally live, and he's already been around a long time in the first book. And he does it with druid sleep, which is he magically goes into a coma. And he doesn't age. I mean, he does age, but he ages extremely slowly during the druid sleep. And he wakes up when the world needs him again. As the only druid left, he's extending his life to be there for when there will be great need to the world again.
It's not really that important, but I amend my previous statement. I think it's 4 generations.
Okay. When he actually dies, there are no druids. And
Oops.
Remember that Hades Horn, the Valley of Shale thing?
Yeah.
Alanon will come back through that to help appoint another druid.
The druids don't go away.
We spent a whole bunch of time where there's either just one druid or no druid or a pseudo-druid, and eventually we get to the reestablishment of the druid order.
But truthfully, even when the druids are gone, the druids aren't gone.
Now, okay, so that was druid magic. But the druids, at the time where they're doing their thing, learning
Yes.
about magic and all, they also discover bad magic. We could say magic of the void, though that language isn't talked about initially.
Not
until
at
we
this
get to
point.
it later, right? And it is forbidden magic. And one of the druids decides, nah, I want to learn about that stuff. And he rebels. He leaves the druids. He goes and does his own thing. And
He becomes a really bad guy.
he becomes a really bad guy. And we're not going into the whole storylines of
No,
of
we're not.
this. We're just
I mean,
talking about the magic.
This is spoiler heavy, but
Yeah. But he ends up becoming, in essence, eternal through evil magic, following a book called the Ildatch. Now, the Ildatch is just, in essence, pure void. It's all evil magic. It's so powerful with evil magic, it eventually becomes sentient of its own.
for Marvel fans out there, think the Darkhold.
Yes, very much so. And this druid, Brona, uses what he learns from the Ildatch to destroy all the other druids except Alanon, and to create a whole bunch of other bad, evil spirits. Think Nazgul from Lord of the Rings, the Witch King, and all that. That's really what he kind of creates. And that's the first book. And I bring it all up because we have to introduce the Sword of Shannara, which is a
Yes.
magical item.
This is one of our first, really the first magic item we're talking about, but really items play a huge point in the magic system.
Right. We've talked about the magic of fairy. We've talked about the magic of the druids. Now we're moving into items. And we talked about the Ildatch. That's a book
And it
full
comes,
of magic, but
it'll be around.
It of itself is an essence of evil. And then we've got the Sword of Shannara. The reason it's called Sword of Shannara is it has a special magic ability, but only someone of the line of Shannara can use it.
And if I recall correctly, the entire reasoning for that is almost kind of an oops,
Yes.
but it is true in the end.
And that would be too much of a spoiler. I mean, we do spoil heavy on midweek specials, but we're not going to bother with that right now. The Shannara line were elves, and so the Sword of Shannara goes back to elves.
I'm sorry, what do you mean were elves?
At the time that this comes out, the Shannara elves are gone.
There we
They've
go.
died out. And the only blood of Shannara that's left is a half-elf named Shay.
Close enough.
But not Shay Shannara. He's
Shay
Shay Omsford. Omsford, I have always said.
Okay.
Shay Omsford, and his, if I remember right, his mom was elven, his father was human. And his mom's been dead a long time, and he was raised by his father amongst humans.
He grew up in the human world.
Yeah. And Elanon, the druid, comes to him and says, "You are needed." And hey, we get that typical fantasy trope of you, regular guy, must come on quest because you are needed to do the thing that only you can do.
He's a farm boy.
And what he must do is go and claim the Sword of Shannara and use it against the druid Brona.
So tell me, what does the Sword of Shannara actually do?
It has one magical ability, and it is lame.
It's really lame. Like, why is this such a powerful, useful item?
And for the most part, it is not useful at all. But it is particularly useful to overcome the evil warlock lord who was the druid Brona. Because what it confronts the person who touches it is it confronts them with the ultimate truth about themselves. And Brona is really dead. He's just a spirit, an essence, who's been retained, hung on by his evil magic, and the sword reveals to himself that you don't really exist anymore.
You have to be gone.
And that defeats him. Boom, just like that.
So you just gotta touch him with the sword, but you have to be able to use the sword.
Yeah, the only one who could activate the sword was someone who had the Shannara blood. And Shay is the only one left. But to do it, Shay also had to confront realities about himself, which he does manage to do. Okay, that's that. That's weak.
It comes back a variety of times, but
Not all that often.
not all that often.
More significantly, we move into,
The next book, really.
when we get into the elf stones of Shannara. Now, the elf stones are like, okay, Terry Brooks, he's thinking I should write more. You know, the sword was kind of weak. I need to come up with something better. And he came up with elf stones. And the elf stones, this is a whole thing. This goes back to the elves being of the time of fairy, and they had a whole bunch of magic. And one of the things they did with their magic is they created a whole bunch of elf stones that were imbued with special abilities. And they came in sets for the most part. We had, I believe the set was always 3 stones.
It was meant to be the mind, heart, and body combined.
And to use an elf stone set, you needed to be elven, and then you needed to engage them fully using all the parts you just referenced.
Now, I do believe there's a little bit of why they needed to be elven, because it was partially when it was created, it was elven innate magic that got put into them, so that's why to access elven magic, you need to have elven blood.
We've noted the elves are more normal now, but they're still innately magical, even if they don't use magic.
Exactly, and this is the kind of part where their magic sensitivity allows them to activate these elf stones.
Now, the elf stones that we meet first are the blue elf stones.
They're pretty.
And at the time we meet them, they're the only elf stones that people know where they are anymore. All the others have been lost or are gone, and they know where they are, but they're gone.
Oops.
All these different elf stones had different abilities. The blue elf stones were known as the seeking stones, and their primary use was to find things.
They were scrying stones, kind of.
A little more than scrying, though, they would lead you to what you were looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. But they also had the ability, and all of the elf stone clusters also had like defensive abilities. You could use them if you're being attacked to just magically zap somebody. I mean, they have those basic skills.
But this is where I think there's an important distinction. The elf stones can affect magical things. If a human's charging at you with a knife, the elf stones do nothing.
Really?
Yep.
I don't remember that.
So they're great against demons.
Oh, sure.
Because they're fairies.
You can't protect yourself from a guy with a sword?
Completely non-magical stuff does nothing.
I did not remember that.
I'm pretty sure it only affects magic.
Okay. If any of you think Zach is wrong,
I could be wrong, because
I just don't remember. I didn't remember that part at all.
Going off of what I loosely know from what I have read and then looked into, but I'm pretty sure that that's true.
Now, part of why I don't remember that clearly is the blue elf stones play a role throughout the Shannara series, but something else is introduced magically that plays a bigger role than the blue elf stones.
Yeah.
Because of the use of the blue elf stones. And here's the thing about the blue elf stones. In order to use them, you have to have been given them. You can't steal them. You
No.
can't take them because you'll have no access to their magical power. You
It
have
has
to have been
be
given them.
gifted from one to another, and only one person at a time can use them.
Right. So one of the Ohmsfords,
Shay starts with them.
but they become in the Elfstones of Shannara, it's Will Ohmsford.
Will is the one who eventually gets them.
Right. And Will uses them defensively a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. He doesn't use them a lot, but he uses them a few times for protection. And the first time he tries to use them, they don't want to work for him. And the reason is because he is, Shay, who used them in the first book, was half-elf.
And he used them fine, no problems.
All the Ohmsford line has been doing since then is marrying more humans. So the bloodline's been getting more and more diluted.
So Will now is only 1/8 elf, and it only works 30% of the time.
He feels like he has to break through something inside himself to access them. And in essence, what happens is he is changed magically by the use of these elfstones.
Long story short, Will is able to use the elfstones more later on. He just has better, easier access because the elfstones say, hey, we're making you more like us.
But when his adventure is done, he puts them away.
Yep.
I'm not using these anymore.
Nope.
They're messing with me. Okay.
But they weren't
Later
done with him.
on, is it his kids or
It's
his
his
grandkids?
kids.
His kids.
That's what I'm pretty sure.
His kids, who are born after this adventure, they are born with magical abilities now.
Now, these are mostly human,
Yes.
but have innate magic.
And this has nothing to do with the Elfstones anymore, but it comes from the Elfstones and what it did to Will. They have something. This is a new magic introduced into the world, but is with us for the rest of the series in various manifestations, called the Wish Song.
And the Wish Song is very important, and we will talk more about it in a moment, but let's finish up what we're talking about, Elfstones, first.
Let's do that.
Because there are a few other types that we do encounter throughout the books, and we can kind of run through what they're capable of, different than the blue Seeking Stones.
Correct. Most of them, we don't really know what they do.
Nah.
There were the Crimson Elfstones, the Emerald Elfstones, the Saffron Elfstones, and the White Elfstones.
Those were the original sets of 3.
All of those are in the Forbidding. Because demons had taken them over, and when they were locked away in the Forbidding, so were those Elfstones.
I want to say the Crimson come back, because we
They
do
do.
see them,
They do.
but not initially. And they're the only one that we know their primary purpose as
the
well.
Emerald, the Saffron, the White, we don't know what their purposes were. We do know about the White Elfstones that an extra ability they had was to defend the bearer from other forms of magic or from those who wield it. But the Crimson Elfstones, you're right, they do come back into the story. They're known as the Draining Stones, where the blue was the Seeking Stones, crimson are the Draining Stones.
That's not ominous at all.
They act as a high-powered, life-draining, fiery weapon, capable of incinerating an enemy within moments. That's kind of powerful.
Yeah, but there is a huge cost.
Yes, using them drains the user of your own life force. So,
It's great, you can incinerate things, but also you might incinerate parts of yourself. Yeah. So maybe
not something you want to use a lot.
be careful.
2 other types of elfstones come up in the story. One of those is the Loden. This was a special stone made for a single purpose, and that was for sealing away the elves to be protected and safe in time of great harm. Now, the elves have a capital city called Arbitrary, and this is generationally their capital, their center of elven culture. It has not always been in the same location. It has
Arbitrary
magically been
moves.
moved. Yes. And the Loden is how it's moved. Key to that, there is a magical tree in Arbitrary called the Elcris. The Elcris is the focus of the magical power that created the Forbidding that keeps the demons out of our world. So you have to keep Arbitrary and the Elcris safe, or the world will descend into chaos as the demons take over.
Because if you remember, the elves are the ones who sealed away the demons in the Forbidding. If the elves fall, if the Elcris falls, so does everything else.
Yep. So the Loden is used a few different times in the series, but again, its sole purpose is to magically...
Hide and move.
Yes, that's it. The other one is the Black Elfstone. Now, this is not a set. It's just a single elfstone.
But it is a kind of mind, body, soul in one.
It has a powerful magic that nothing can stand against.
It's your Deus Ex Machina in a stone.
Its power is to consume and negate all other magics.
Yeah.
But again, it has a price.
It's
that's
pretty
used with
big.
it. Any magic that is negated is transferred into the wielder. and will have whatever detrimental consequences. It's not like, okay, if you negated this power to walk on air, now you can walk on air? No. Now you cannot walk on air? No. It's going to do something negative to you. That's the point. So anyone who uses the Black Elf Stone is going to suffer consequences.
And it's equivalent in power, not necessarily in the exact effect.
Yeah. So that's used a few different times. We're not going to go in details of it, but it is a very powerful magic.
Very powerful, very limited in how it can be used because of the price.
Yes. We do want to move on to the Wish Song, which is a primary magic throughout the rest of the series. But before we do that, I want to jump back to one more element of the Druid magic that we haven't talked about.
Ooh, let's go.
But the Black Elfstone reminded me of it. And
what
that
did
is,
we miss?
The Druids established their power base in Paranor.
Yes,
Okay.
you mentioned that.
But they built something special into Paranor to make sure only Druids could ever control Paranor. Because Paranor has a whole bunch of magic stuff. It has...
I mean, it's where they bring all of the items that are magical that they go find.
It has all the recorded knowledge that they've gained. It should never fall into someone else's hands, or all the work the Druids have done will go
the
for naught.
entire point of them being outside of any borders is completely ruined.
Correct. So they have a magical being, essence, power. It's never well defined, but something called the Guardian. And the Guardian exists beneath Paranor. Now, Paranor is built up on a bluff, a butte.
A cliffside.
Not a side, it's up on top.
Yeah,
a mesa.
It's
Maybe that's
on
the
top
right
of
term.
a cliff
Right.
side.
It's up there, elevated from the forest around it. And deep inside it is this entity, the Guardian. And it can be activated by the Druids, or it can activate itself if the Druids aren't there and someone else tries to come into Paranor.
If you're not supposed to be there, the Guardian will mess you up.
And its touch is death. There's nothing that can resist the Guardian. It will kill. And this happens multiple times. Sometimes a Druid is leaving and activates the Guardian so no one else can come in until there's another Druid. Mm-hmm. It will recognize a Druid. So if you are a druid, it will not attack you. But otherwise, you be dead. You be dead. So they never explain where this comes from.
They don't explain where it comes from, if it was made or just existed.
We get the impression that it was either made or tapped into by the Druids.
I like to think that it would need to be tapped into, because otherwise why couldn't they make more?
Okay.
But if it's something that you have to access, it already existed. They just helped kind of move it over to the side of Druids.
Now, one of the criticisms, again, of Terry Brooks is that a lot of magic that comes along at times seems to serve the story. Where, he comes up with, hey, I think they can do this too now because I want to do this in the story. And what we were just talking about with the Guardian and various things that happen with Paranor and stuff, it was reminding me of another one of the powers that shows up that the Druids have that we don't hear about originally.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it could just be Brooks had all this already and he revealed it.
But it
over
also
time.
could be he served to his plot.
So another one of the abilities Druids have is to go all Doctor Strange.
In what way? He does a lot of things.
To go on the astral plane, to project themselves.
Astral projection.
Yes. Druids can do that. I don't know that all Druids can do that. But that's an ability some Druids do have. It's used
It's another part of
times.
the spirit side of things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So not elemental, but it is another ability some of the Druids present at times during the story. Now, let's talk about the Wish Song.
Cool.
And the Wish Song is a magic that changes and develops all the way through. And this is something that Brooks actually wrote in well.
And
because it changes because people change.
Exactly. It's one of the few inconsistent magic elements that is totally okay that it's inconsistent because it's supposed to be and it's evolving.
Once it presents in the initial two children of Will Ohmsford, Jer and Bryn, it then will present again in other generations of Ohmsfords.
Not
but
every one.
Not all of them. It skips some generations.
It's kind of random.
It does. It shows up here and there. And it doesn't always show up the same way. Just like it didn't show up in the two of them the same way.
At least, especially not initially.
Bryn has the ability with the Wish Song, the basic, most powerful ability to sing things into reality.
It's ridiculous.
She can basically cause anything she wants to happen by singing it.
change things, create things, destroy things. Just gotta sing it.
It's an amazingly powerful. And Brooks does not waste his time getting into, well, how do you have to sing? How can you breathe while you're singing? I mean, he doesn't waste any time with that. You sing the wish song. So in that way, it's very loosey-goosey. But as readers, we don't care. You're emitting the wish song. Okay.
As readers,
and it does things.
You don't care, at least.
I mean, I had those questions as I was, asking. It's like, how do you then still breathe if you have to keep singing this whole time? Like, one of the things you can do with it is make yourself invisible. Okay, until you take a breath. And the singing isn't like, I'm invisible now, and I'm going to keep being invisible now.
I imagine it could be if they wanted it to be.
No, because they do describe this, that you can use the wish song just like humming.
Mm-hmm.
And just making that noise with the intent of what you want to have happen, it happens. So it's more about what you're thinking about doing with the wish song and then emitting noise in some manner.
It's more about the wish part as long as there is a song.
Now, Jer can't do...
No. Initially, he more or less can do illusions. And that's
right.
about it.
That's right. He can do everything that Bryn can do, except what he does is not real.
Eventually, he gets to a point where he can more or less take on the abilities of his illusions and becomes more powerful.
Did you read
more
that
similar
short story?
like Bryn? It's from a short story.
Indomitable.
I did not actually read that one yet.
That's cool. Yeah, he has an extra adventure eventually to save his sister.
Yeah. And so he also becomes more powerful in the sense that shows the wish song, even in an individual, can evolve.
But that's kind of an exception. And it implies that he just didn't realize what he was capable of. At least that's how Brooks does it. So the wish song, it has those abilities. And the ability of the wish song doesn't truly change. It's what people learn and are capable of doing with it that changes. And their knowledge of it.
It's still always going to be wishing. It's still always going to be singing, kind of. But what that means they're capable of is different.
The wish song takes its final evolution in the final couple of series, 7 books. The end of the whole thing, where you've got people who don't realize they are of the Olmsford blood, who manifest ability with the wish song without knowing what it's doing. And I mean, there's a character who disintegrates somebody with the wish song and then passes out from this amazing power that pours out of her, and not knowing what she was doing or even that she was capable of it. Just disintegrates. It was a bad guy, thankfully.
Well, that's good.
But yeah.
I was just thinking, what, a childhood bully? Just oops.
Later on in the last series, you have a character still discovering things that she can do with the wish song, because she did not know she had this ability, where she teleports with the wish song. Now, they don't really say she teleports, but she is hanging off like a tree branch, a root, like she's fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
And she just managed to grab on, and there's no way to climb up, and she's going to lose her grip. And she just decides to try to use the wish song, and she closes her eyes and sings herself back up at the top. And when she opens her eyes, she's there.
So did she?
They don't show her floating or anything.
Did she
It's
teleport?
like she teleported herself up there.
Who knows?
Yeah. She wished it to be, and the magic made it happen.
Which is a good enough explanation of what the wish song really allows.
Yep. And that really says enough about the wish song. There are a number of other magical things that happen and exist throughout the rest of the stories, but they all are tied to fairy and the essence of magic. And it all plays into things we've already talked about.
And while the items themselves may have better description, we never really get, as far as I'm aware, that good of a explanation of what is fairy magic, besides it is magic.
Yep. There's one other magical object or item that I'd like to bring up.
Let's do it.
And that's the Sword of Leah. Now, the Sword of Leah, I got to back up just a little. In the very first story with Shay Olmsford, he and his brother,
Flick,
had a good friend, Menion Leah. And that family has a sword, a huge broadsword that is their ancestral weapon. It's a special thing that gets passed down from son to son to son, okay?
Instead of the Sword of Shannara, we get the Sword of Leah.
But this is a real weapon. But it is this impressive, historic weapon. And at one point, I don't remember if it's this first one or if it's with his son later on, but Alanon takes that sword and dips it into the Hades horn, Remember the Valley of Shale?
Yeah,
That
that's
magic-
the, like,
he
death water.
dunks it down like it's Achilles, and I'm only holding the pommel.
Because I'm not touching
and
that
I'm
death
dipping
water.
it, but he draws it out. It has been dipped into this, and it is transformed magically. And then this sword plays a role throughout the rest of the series. And what we come to understand about the sword eventually is what it has the ability to do is to cancel magic. So someone shoots a spell at him and he can raise his sword and diffuse the spell. So it
an
provides
anti-magic sword.
magical protection. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Again,
How and exactly
we get no
why?
real explanation on why that works.
But it works. So it's cool. Now we get to actually rate this, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and there's even more to it, but that's all the principles involved with the magic of Shannara.
But now we can use our 6 points of judgment
Yes,
to arbitrarily judge this.
that's right. And we're talking about, basically what kind of rating, what kind of score are we going to give to the magic system of Shannara? If you remember our first time where we did the Wheel of Time, we awarded Fat Man Warrior Buddhas.
It was quite a mouthful.
Yes. This time we are simply awarding elf stones.
That seems appropriate.
Yeah. So how many elf stones in each category, up to a total of 5, can be earned?
Therefore, how many elf stones out of 30?
The first category, again, is consistency of definition. So we're talking about how well is this magic system clearly defined with rules that are consistently followed.
This one, in my opinion, as I understand it, is a little bit hard for me because there is a lot of elements that it doesn't feel initially clearly defined or it doesn't feel consistent, but you look later on, there aren't contradictions.
Right.
It just keeps getting things added.
And I want to remind you of the next rating scale, which is clarity.
Yeah.
So when we talk about consistency of definition, you said the key thing there. Terry Brooks doesn't tend to contradict what he said about magic in an earlier book. The things you learn, you don't learn everything you want to know about it. You don't necessarily understand everything. But once you learn how something works, it tends to always work that way.
I don't know that it always is 100% perfect, and your example with Jer in the short story for the Wish Song is one of those key examples of it works that way differently.
But wasn't
but
it morphing
not in
into
all the
something
others.
further? Not necessarily that it changed or it contradicted, but he didn't realize what he could
Well, the only
do
reason
with
I bring that up is because you say never something like that. What happens again? So
it, that I recall.
if it's never coming up again, it's like, okay, maybe that was just a bending of the rules for the plot.
So our scale being 1 of vague, bends to plot, versus 5 set in stone.
Set in Elfstone.
Nice.
I'll give it a 4.
I will concur with the 4. So let me mark that down. We're going to give that a 4. Now, clarity. How well is the magic system revealed to the reader? With a bottom of clear as mud and a top as crystal clear, how well is this all clarified and explained for us?
So sitting at a position where I have not read all of them, I have to give a judgment of that is completely arbitrary and will probably change when I have read them all and say, often I don't think it's very clear.
But I'd say, it's explained well enough for what we need to know to move the plot along.
That's not good enough for me. You should be able to see the things so that you can really have some clear definitions and you don't expect things that happen up.
I think
But you know things before they happen.
I think for Terry Brooks, this is about telling a story, not telling about magic.
I think you need to have elements in explaining your magic that serve as foreshadowing rather than the magic happening as a reaction or being revealed to us as a reaction to something that was necessary.
How about a 3?
Sure.
We'll give it the middle of the road, which is working knowledge.
Because
We
I
have a
was
working
leaning
knowledge.
towards like a 2 and I feel like you were going more a 4 or 5. So I'll take the 3.
All right, our next scale is power. Just how strong is this magic?
This
1
depends.
being weak, does little. The top being godlike.
This depends a lot. Are we talking
There's so many different
the
types
Sword
of
of Shannara? Because that's weak.
But it defeats the Warlock Lord that no one else could touch.
Yeah, but it defeats it about as well as Stephen King's It is defeated through the power of friendship.
Love.
That's not a diss on It. I think it's actually a very good story. It's a little dumb of an ending.
But the Wish Song, man.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and
there
there's
are
a lot of really
certain
powerful
elf
stuff
stones
done with Druid magic too.
Yeah, there are powerful things. I think there are a lot of limitations to this magic. Say the elf stones, a lot of the most powerful things convey huge harms to the user. Say the Wish Song, it's limited in its accessibility. And while that may come into some of our other categories more, it does impact a little bit what that power can be. Just a little bit. So it's
I
still
think this is above
very
average,
powerful.
but we're saying there's enough things we're questioning. It shouldn't be a 5. It could
No,
be a 4.
it can't be a 5. If only because the Sword of Shannara is so lame.
But the Wish Song is so cool. And the Druid magic does some wicked awesome things.
I like blowing things up.
So we'll go with a 4. Impact. How much does magic impact this world and the story being shared?
This is one where
this one's
is good
pretty huge.
because, well, he really does a good job of using magic to further the plot and to fix problems that arise in the plot. Magic is kind of
Sometimes the magic is the reason the problems come up, but they're also the solution.
Magic is his go-to to really move the story along. It facilitates the story, which is something I do think is valuable.
There is a segment of the storyline, and it involves Walker Bow, who becomes the one and only druid for a time. And he would be known as the reluctant druid. He was supposed to become a druid. He rejects being a druid and ends up becoming the druid, despite his intentions. But where he comes upon science, some of the past technology, and it ends up... Okay, we're spoiler heavy in these.
Yeah, you're being very spoiler heavy.
It ends up killing him in the end, but still, it's his magic that allows the rest of people to continue on. So magic is always the most powerful thing, and
It's the most
accomplishes
important
everything.
thing.
Yeah, so I would
I'd
go
give
with
it
a
a 5.
Yeah, which is tremendous on
The
this
impact in this story is big.
scale. Yep.
This story is about magic.
Practical value. What good does the magic system do in the world?
On a practical scale, in most things, not a whole lot.
Oh man, no, I want to disagree on that.
Well,
You've got
here's my
one
reasoning.
of the nations, the Southland, the Federation,
Yeah,
are extremely anti-magic.
yeah.
There are magic users down there occasionally, but they are evil and bad guys and hide in shadow. But primarily magic is outlawed in the Federation. And they are the vastly more numerous of the people in the world, the ones who reject magic. And yet they're not the ones that move things truly.
I'm not sure rejecting magic is the sole reason for that. Though I do think there's a bit of, hey, if we're moving the story forward with magic, you need magic to be useful. That being said, to me, magic is so limited. There's druids, but through many points of the story, there's only one. And
That's early on. For the, I'd
there
say
are
the
other
whole
times that happens.
the whole second half of the 30 plus books, there are druids,
And let's
plural
go
again.
a step further, though. The elves, various fairies and such that have innate magic in the time of our stories don't really have magic they are using that much. They just are magical. It doesn't impact their lives on a day-to-day basis how they actually do the little things they do. And
And yet, you're talking about the elves, you said.
sure,
The Elchris, which is keeping the forbidding strum and keeping the demons out, is magic in its purest form.
I don't fight that.
And that's going all the time.
I don't fight that, but we don't claim when we did our Wheel of Time episode that the seals on the Dark One's prison are part of the practical value of magic.
However, those were a static thing. The Elchris is a living entity that constantly is holding off the demons.
But it works often like a static thing.
No, because when the seals weaken, that's it. Game over. Out comes the Dark Lord.
No,
When the
that's
Elchris
fine.
weakens, you get a new Elchris.
I'm just sitting here going,
And the Elchris is the one who makes sure we get a new Elchris. So no.
9 times out of 10, it's there and it matters, but it's not actively doing something besides holding back the forbidding.
The Druids, with their magic, do things whenever they are an active organization. They are working throughout the lands, making sure that things are moving well, that people are cared for, that there's good stuff being done with the magic.
Biggest reason I want to kind of pull back and say what is the practical value overall in the story and why it's less so than it could be. And that's some of the most powerful things, be it the Elf Stones or the Wish Song, by its very nature can only be so many. Even if we had all of the Elf Stones, there can only be one person using them at a time. Even if a ton of people are trying to make babies and produce things.
We need some more Elfstone babies.
No, I'm talking Wish Song now.
Okay.
You can only have so many in that bloodline, and only so many are going to magically get the Wish Song. So yeah, it's great. It happens, but it's rare enough that it can't be useful except on the epic scale. And not saying magic is not useful in this world. However, I think it serves the plot more than it serves the world at large.
Okay. So what are you suggesting on the score, with 1 being a little value, 5 being highly significant?
I'd put it a 3 that I'm not willing to go higher on.
All right, I'll cave. I'll give you the 3. There are certainly people in this world that go their whole lives really not being impacted by magic at all.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one where I may...
Except that they don't know the forbidding is the only thing keeping them
If they don't know, they don't care. It may change my tune on this one eventually when I've read all of them.
But you gotta get busy.
Yeah, that's why I say in 2 years, I will come out with a retraction and my adjusted scores. Some of them might go down. Some might go up.
All right, the last is means of usage. What does it take of a person to use the magic?
Depends.
1 is nearly impractical. Middle of the road would be requires training but doable. And the highest is it's like breathing. It's so simple.
That depends.
It really does. But, if you have the wish song, it's like you born
like
with a spark,
breathing.
and it's just going to happen.
If you're a druid, it requires training, but it is doable.
And there are some where they have no shot. There's pretty much nothing you can do to...
If you're just a regular old human and you don't have the aptitude to become a druid, it's not going to happen.
Or if you're holding the sword of Shannara.
It's just... It's not going to happen. And let's go a step further, even with some powerful things like an elf stone, when they are doing their most powerful things, they often come at the cost of the user, which makes it a little bit harder to use. You can't do as much with it because you will die.
So I'm looking at these, and I'm going somewhere between a 2 and a 3. What do you think?
I think because there are elements at both a 1, 3, and a 5 throughout the story, we should hit the 3.
All right.
It's a fair 3, but if not for the sake that there are some elements and characters, and there are, even if we go to the evil side, all those demons do magic things like breathing. They just are magic.
All right, that brings us to a grand score of 22 elf stones assigned to the magic system of
That's
Shannara.
not bad. I mean, it's lower than we gave
It
for the
doesn't
Wheel
reach
of
the
Time.
26 that Wheel of Time got, but
it's not that low.
I think it's fair that we wouldn't put the magic system of Shannara up at the same par as the 1 power in the Wheel of Time.
Personally, I think it's going to be really rare for us to get below like a 15.
Wow. I don't know that we want to even talk about a series that's that lower in the rating.
Well, that would be like the magic part of it must be only average throughout all of it.
I guess.
But I think that's still a decent score overall.
All right.
And that's with me giving a lot of hate on a couple of these topics.
All right. Well, that does it. That covers our coverage of the magic system of the world of Shannara. If you agreed with us, great. Tell us. If you disagree with us, great. Send us your hate mail. We want to hear from you.
Please tell me the actual name of the world of Shannara, because it's not named after the family, and I can't remember for the life of me what the world is called.
Earth.
Yeah, but I'm sure the series world has a name that isn't Shannara.
The 4 lands, I think. The Southland, the Northland, the Westland, and the Eastland. I think it's just called the 4 lands.
Fair enough.
Even though
So
they
the
do
magic system
travel
of the four
over
lands.
the ocean in a couple of different series to other places, but it's the
Great.
4 lands, primarily.
Great.
Could also be called Washington and Oregon, maybe.
Might as well.
Yeah. All right. Hope you enjoyed traveling along with us again today.
I sure did.
If you are enjoying what we have here, tell people what you found and let them enjoy it too. We encourage you to subscribe and make sure you don't miss any of our episodes. We'd love to hear from you.
You can always talk to us through our email, fantasyfortheages@gmail.com, or any of our social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Come talk to us directly on Discord.
All of the access links and invites for those are in our show notes.
Or if you want to support us in any financial way.
You guys are so awesome. Take my money.
Or in part of doing that, come and talk with us live as we record. You can always contribute to us on Patreon.
Yes. We were kind of lonely today. Nobody showed up in the live recording.
It's okay. It's an off day for us.
It's a Monday late evening on Pacific time zone. Yeah, people are busy doing other recordings and stuff. It's hard. So not our normal time, but life. All right. Anything else, Zach?
I've got nothing.
All right. Thanks for being here again, everybody. And we will talk to you next time.